piece that Raisbai has shared with us, I think, first of all, it is an incredibly nuanced and complicated kind of a dialogue that we spoke. And my first reaction listening to it was like, are audiences going to be able to get the nuances of this? Or is it just going to get reduced to, oh, he's addressing the whole anti-caste movement as casteist. Like that's like an explosive one line, right? So
Yes.
I thought any conversation on it first has to kind of really center that this is not a sensationalist point, that this is not a any person who wants to comment on it, tear it down or agree with it, even agree with it, first has to really unpack what it is trying to say, right? And what I feel like, for me, a lot of the references to the movements and the personalities are a little alien to me because I'm not very well versed with regional iterations of the movement in that sense. But what I felt was that just if you look at what the fundamental points he's making, like one of the first points he's making is that that the academic part of the anti-caste movement is a little casteist, and that I actually really agree with. It's a very controversial point, but I think I agree with him there, and I'll explain why I feel that in that sense. When we are talking about academia and the anti-caste movement, I think there are two things to think about, which I think what Riceby is also referring to, and I also sort of agree with this in the sense, first of all, the rules of performing academia, right? Um for a majority of anti-caste scholars coming even from Bahujan backgrounds or Dalit backgrounds, the rules are set by Savarnas. Okay, and I won't say this is the experience of maybe Raisbai's experience is different. I feel that there are people who are doing work which are not who are not playing by the Savarna rules, right? But a majority of the people are playing by Savarna rules. What do I mean by Savarna rules? They are still looking for publication, validation, acceptance, circulation, and adulation from the same Savarna audiences that they are ostensibly critiquing. It becomes very obvious in some of these dynamics. And this is not a new ploy by the Savarna academic industry, if you think about it, right? It's now it's now been many years they try to foist these upper caste experts upon us. The most notable example, which obviously kind of like exploded spectacularly, was Arundhati Roy's, installation as this interlocutor of Baba Sahib's work, and the violent pushback against it sort of confirmed to them that this role cannot be played by a Savarna academic, right? Because their biggest superstar they tried and it did not work, right? So you need a non-Savarna face for that role, but that role is essentially a very Savarna role. It is the authenticator of the discourse. One person will sit and decide who goes on a list and who does not go on list. One person will sit and decide who goes and writes a column and does not get to write a column. You're essentially creating an authenticator, right? The academic term, if I put it very simply, is a gatekeeper, right? And that role, and we've seen this actually in other spheres also, right? Like not related to caste, but I often connect it to cinema. If you look at the role about how cinema in Bollywood, for instance, right? Like someone like Anurag Kashyap, who's coming from the same upper caste, like Savarna circles and everything, right? But he was an outsider to the industry, right? And in the early 2000s, they install him as a gatekeeper to the point that every quote unquote indie cinema project that was happening in Bollywood, right, from about 2008 to 2015 16, which are peak years of Kashyap, I would say roughly, always the film would open, there would be a slide saying special thanks to Anurag Kashyap. Everything had his footprint on it. He became the validator, right? Either you go watch the big Dharma Varma Sharma cinema, or it has to be special thanks by Kashyap, right? It is a sort of a cornering of the market in that sense. The problem is that in the anti-caste discourse, you cannot install an Anurag Kashyap. You can't install a Kashyap. They tried, like I said, they have failed. So now that space is being offered to academics, right? And what is the criteria for that? This is what I also feel like. The criteria is you have to play, quote unquote, the radical. You're performing a radicality. The rules of that radicality are also, characterized by a very specific format of articulations. You have to be bold, aggressive, and all of that, right? Kintu, when you're going and talking to the same Savarna interlocutors, then you're really polite. That's the very interesting aspect of it. Like if someone critiques you, even if they're coming from a Dalit and Bahujan background, then you will be like, oh, you don't know this, you're that. Nowadays on social media discourse, I'm hearing all kinds of things, terms like house Harijans. It's clearly borrowed from the American black experience, like, house Negroes in that sense. Like your house Harijans, I'm hearing. Like a violent critique, like even if you're from a Dalit or a Bahujan background, you can't critique these people, right? But the interesting part is, look how these people are talking to the stalwarts of the Savarna academia superstardom, right? With the Spivaks, with the Partha Chatterjees and the Anupama Raos and the Nivedita Menons. Look how that interaction is happening. Look how they're interacting with Navayana publications and all of these big publications, right? Then it's very revealing actually. If you're that radical, then you should be attacking them more, no? You're so radical that you're finding your fellow Dalit and fellow Bahujan as house Harijans. Then if they are house Harijans, then who are these people who are running this entire apparatus? But then with them, you're very polite and civil. They are giving you book contracts, you're writing book contracts with them. Right? So this I think is something that needs to be called to attention. Right? How is it that you are so radical that your own fellow peers are like compromised for you, but the masters of the culture industry are people that you can who are like neatly aligning in that sense, right? Because coming back to the point that academia in that sense, right? And again, I would emphasize, I don't think all Dalit Bahujan intellectuals are doing this, because there are many scholars from whom I've learned a lot who are completely who will not play ball at all, who have, I'm sure, been offered this role in some capacity or the other. They'll give this lalach, greed. Why don't you do this column? Why don't you edit this book for us? Why don't you edit this list for us? I'm sure those lalaches have been given to them. I'm sure they have rejected it. So there's a body of people who are like that. But there are also people who have not rejected it, who have accepted it. It is a politics of those people which is starting to now define this anti-caste, discourse within academia, right? And I don't see that as a resistance. I see that as a co-option. So in that sense, Raisbai's comment that anti-caste academia is casteist, right? To a great extent, within what I've just described in the last 5 minutes, it fits. Because if the only role available to me is to play the radical, where I am going and proving my radicality on the other Dalit Bahujans, and I am sort of in dialogue, conversation, in business with the academic masters of Savarna academia, then I'm sorry, I'm playing by their rules, right? So that is definitely a part that I agree. And then very closely tied to this comes, which also, like, Risebhai has talked about in terms of inclusivity, but I also connect this to this idea, which is, this almost fetishization of authenticity, which is another thing which is coming up. This authenticity Olympics, right? You get to say this, so it's no longer like, very interestingly, if you think about it, just look at, now there's a new trend to connect anti-caste to the anti-racism movement. Okay, great. Intersectionality is always welcome. But one very interesting feature of the black movement in the US, right, is it's not divided on, there can be many divisions, like they have these frictions, right? Like there are skin tone, like there are some black people whose skin is really light, right? And there are some black people whose skin is really dark, right? And they have all of these things, like they have these tensions that you can pass for white, or you can pass through the white gaze because your skin tone is not so, black, or your hair is not so, crinky and all of those things. But there is no gradation in black authenticity, right? You're black means you're black. I'm going to see you, I'm going to say my black sister, you're going to say my black brother, that's it. We are not going to compare, oh wait, my skin is more darker than this and that. Similarly, another way the movement could have split is the authenticity. Like, are you black who was born in the Caribbean, who has roots in the Caribbean, or are you have native connections in whatever, in Africa? Are you, the black who's descendant of the Union slave, not Union slave, the plantation workers? Are you whatever? You get what I'm saying, right? That has also not happened. Your experience of historical trauma may have been different. Like your ancestors may have been, whatever, like from the Caribbean. My ancestors may have actually done the transatlantic journey and everything, but that's not going to come between us when we are facing the white man. Then we are one, right? That lack of, oh, I am more authentic than you, right, is strangely not there in the Dalit Bahujan discourse. Because there it becomes about, like, this is another commentary. Your elite Dalit, your elite Bahujan, all of these conversations will come in, right? Then this conversation, like, it's like you have to be first generation from the rural area. This almost fetishization of, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you haven't grown up in a slum, right? So this is a very interesting aspect of this voice, like, this marker of who has the final authority, right? It reduces the conversation to a lack of plurality, right? It becomes about purity, not plurality, right? And if we have learned anything from Baba Sahib, any conversation on purity is inherently linked to Brahminical. It's again Brahminical rules then, right? So in that sense, like, I again feel, and these two are connected. The radical anti-caste academic and the authority who will have to speak, right? Who can speak and who can't speak. These are very closely tied to each other, right? And this is a very nuanced point, and it's very difficult to raise this point on social media because then, there are Hajar Savarnas watching, and I personally genuinely believe in that if Dalits and Bahujans are fighting amongst themselves, we all lose credibility in the Savarna games. Nobody wins in that conversation because then it becomes like, oh, look, these people are like that only. Coming to what Risebhai is saying, like, in its broad spirit, what he's saying, right? That anti-caste, especially the academia aspect of it, anti-caste academia is casteist. And I agree with that statement for these two purposes, because first of all, who is the anti-caste academic? If you leave out the people who are not playing by these rules, who are going ahead, doing their own little thing, running their own little platforms, and and doing great work there, right? They are on the side. But who is into the system? who's actively publishing books with the Savarna publishers and who is actually in that conference circuit and making those networks, right? So who is that academic? What is his or her politics, right? And then also this closely tied to this idea about who is the authentic voice. And in that authentic voice, I would also like to add another thing. Like, this is another thing that I'm increasingly seeing, right? This idea of, OBCs are violent, right? I have written public posts about this. OBCs, OBC is a term, literally, OBC is like, I like to say this and it may be controversial, but it is what it is. It's like the others folder, where you could not put other identities, you put it there. It's an eclectic mix of literally thousands of castes, right? And it includes Dalits, it includes Dalit Muslims, right, who have been listed there because our blessed system will not give them the SC status. So they've been listed there, right? So it includes Muslims who are about 8 to 9%. It includes nomadic tribes, DNTs, SNTs, all manners of communities to reduce the OBC identity to, like these dominant communities, landed communities, is such a tremendous invisibilization. है ना? अभी अगर आप एक चीज सोचो, for instance, like, if you look at, like, let's say a community like the Mayos in Mewat, New district of Haryana. New was ranked the most backward district in India by Niti Aayog in 2018, right? Now, if you go, they are listed as backward. They are not listed as ST, right? And they're the most backward ranked according to Niti Aayog. Right, so these communities basically they'll come under your thing, and you are saying that OBC is just like this dominant landed people. So what happens to the Mayo people, the most backward district in India? And there's so many examples like that, right? So coming back to again what Raisbai is saying, isn't that casteist? Aren't you invisibilizing their identities? When you say OBC is only Jat and Yadav and all of these people, what about the 9% Pasmanda Muslim? Who will speak for them? What about the 9-10% NT, SMT and DNTs and who are also listed in the OBC list, who are getting no benefits? Early findings from Rohini Commission are telling us this, that there are almost about, I may be wrong, but there are almost about 1800 castes in the OBC list out of 5,000, 1800 out of 5,000 who have less than 2% benefits. And 40 castes out of 5,000 have taken away almost half of reservations of OBC in admission and hiring. This is what happens, like, so when you're saying that, OBC just means the, Ahir and the Kunbi and the Jat, when you're saying that, aren't you invisibilizing the voices of all of these other people? Isn't that casteist? Right. And similarly, like, within Dalits, like, I don't have the positionality to talk about, Dalits in that sense. And I don't want to get into that. But what Raisbai is saying is also very interesting. There are many different castes which are listed under scheduled caste. Right. Hand on heart, haath dil pe rakh ke bata do, honestly, that there is no discrimination within the SCs, within the caste listed under SCs. As a sociologist, we see this data. We know this is happening. So this kind of discourse, which is reducing, 5,000 caste of OBCs and thousands of hundreds of castes under SC and ST and all of this into these monolithic categories, SC, ST, OBC. Like their chess pieces, right? This reductionism is also a form of casteism because you're categorizing, in monolithic blocks and your imagination can't go beyond that. And this, this monolithic block operating underneath this monolithic nation. which is also strange in its own way. Like, I was reading Kancha Ilaiah sir's new book, the Shudra, the New Vision. The whole book is like it's about, like, India as a national project. What is this obsession with this national project? The party in power has worked incredibly hard in interpreting the national in the hyper local. Wherever the prime minister goes, whichever gali mohalla he will go, he will talk about the local deity there. He is bringing the nation to your local deity. He understands. That's the reason why these people are in power. They understand that the nation has to be made, interpreted for the hyper local. Otherwise, it's actually not relevant. What's happening in New Delhi is not relevant in in Guntur or in Bhuj or in Wardha. In that sense, it's not relevant. Nation has to be interpreted. But the response from the anti-caste movement, which is traditionally sourced in regional identity and regional plurality and regional diversity, is to speak and have these national aspirations, right? Which is again very playing by Savarna rules in that sense, right? And I have a very sort of a amateurish metaphor for this. Like a new film came out, Godzilla versus King Kong. So it's almost like, to fight the Godzilla of the Brahminism, you need like a King Kong version of your movement. But that's not how it's ever going to work. You cannot defeat Brahminism in centralizing unitary homogeneity thing, because then you're playing by their rules, right? You have to give voice to plurality of issues. You have to give voices to diversities, right? Firstly, this whole Pasmanda discourse, no non-Muslim scholar will touch it, because they will say this is Muslim issue, we will not get into it. So what should they, who will do it then, right? So they will not touch it. The Vimuktas, the NTs, DNTs, they are some of the most vulnerable people in this country, right? They are the people with the most like the because their occupations are literally going obsolete. Their nomadic lifestyle is being increasingly, generation after generation, being encroached by the state. They are the ones who are landing on the periphery of the urban cities. They are the ones who are doing all this construction labor. I'm pretty sure ye jo Central Vista people are doing, it is only anti-nomadic people only who are and because their only asset is their absolute basic physical body and labor, right? Because their historical skills have been made obsolete. This community, which is uprooted from its traditional historical life across different regions, they are not going to create bodies of knowledge in assertion. So who's going to do it for them? Or are they condemned to remain invisibilized? Right? So who's working, which anti-caste scholar is working to broad base this idea? Or is the conversation only going to be, okay, like, the Dalit radical? Right? So that essentializing key, like the only challenge is we are, in fact, I'm seeing these discourse that we reject this concept of Bahujan, right? Because then it means Dalit and OBC will come together, right? But when you're rejecting OBC, you're also rejecting the Pasmanda Muslims, you're also rejecting the NTs, you're also rejecting the DNTs. Micro communities, 1200 log in a huge state, you're rejecting them. Who will they look at that if they can't have this access? You get what I'm saying, right? And this idea, and I don't want to be misinterpreted, I want to make it very emphatically clear. Okay, the Dalit movement in this country has kept anti-caste discourse alive. We owe them a lot, right? Tremendous, especially Maharashtra, and then later on in UP and North India. They've done tremendous, unparalleled, heroic work at a community level. It is thanks to their labors that we've all reached this stage that we can have this conversation. This did not come from, NTs and, DNTs. Matlab, there have been efforts, but this collectivized discourse, the way I understand it, has come to us from, their efforts in that sense. But currently where we stand, the accumulated, aggregated labors of all of these ebbs and flows have brought us to this precipice where the Savarna academic and intellectual, even media industry has sort of now realized that to remain credible, एक caste का dimension डालना पड़ेगा, right? And the Brahminical impulses is to make it a binary, partly because they are, sharp like that, partly because they are mediocre enough to just mimic the black and white, thing. It's a both. It's a tremendous amalgamation of shrewdness and mediocrity, which sums up Brahminism in that sense. So for them, their insistence on reducing caste to a Brahmin Dalit binary makes sense. I understand why Savarnas would want to do that. Right? Why is the anti-caste Dalit scholar playing into this? What are you getting from this? You're becoming a talking head on the media. You're getting a book deal. Yehi. And what are you giving up in that context? How many marginalized communities are you throwing under the bus? These are communities who have not had historical education, right? There are communities where literally even in 2021, not even 50 women have reached the stage of post-graduation ever. इस level का backwardness है, right? Now when we're seeing all these stories about bodies being buried and found in the UP river, who are these people? Right? Where are they? Like, who were they? Who can estimate if we sociologically, who were these people? So do they have to be erased? So what is the anti-caste Dalit radical academic gaining? This is a question I ask myself a lot in that sense. I don't know whether anyone listening to this is understanding the pain and the nuance behind this. You're playing to the Savarna galleries. You want to be the sorry to use this phraseology, but you want to be the Dalit Che Guevara or Dalit Malcolm X. Right? That is a very Savarna imagery. That is not our imagery. That is not the Bahujan imagery. Right? Because when you are the, anointed revolutionary, it's so easy to co-opt a person. It is so easy to co-opt a person, intimidate, bully, threaten, whatever. And let no person have that ego that they're above this. Everybody can be co-opted, which is why ideas have to be bigger than people. Institutions and movements have to be bigger than people. Right? So I completely agree with Raisbhai when he says that, anti-caste movement is casteist in that sense. Because if you leave out the people who are on the sides doing their thing, right? The people who are in the mainstream, who are playing to Savarna galleries, they are playing by Savarna rules, they are doing all of this. Right? So it is very unfortunate, but it is what it is in that sense. And I don't know how we talk about this now. Right? I'm not from the Dalit community. I'm honestly not worried about the Dalit community in terms of its intellectual and organizational potential. They've been doing it for generations. Like I said, they have heroically led this march. I am very anxious about the Pasmandas, the NTs, the DNTs, and the marginalized OBCs. Even amongst, I read this great paper which was talking about OBC women. Right? Like Kanchailaya will write like, OBCs are great, like he will romanticize the whole, dairy culture and everything. But what about the OBC women? How are we supposed to think of OBC women? Are they women amongst OBCs or are they OBC women? It really made me think about that whole question in that sense that it's actually really true when we say that Yadav and Jat and all of these people, that they are dominant and they're doing. What about the women in those communities? Are we going to throw them under the bus? Right? Because these are also questions that we need to ask. And if anti-caste academia led by Dalit and Bahujan intellectuals is not going to ask this question, then who will ask this question? Right? If the whole discourse is just about reacting to caste atrocities and things like that, then you're missing out. That's the space where intellectual work is also needed. Right? There is just too much going on at two simultaneously in that sense, right? And I think this is a very important, viable conversation. Like, how do people place themselves? Are there times that we have this question only, like, do I have the authentic voice? Do I have to say anything? And then I have to then calibrate my radicalness and sharpness of response based on what I feel is what I should be doing, right? Because the Savarna market wants the most radical response, right? Usko nuanced response nahi chahiye. They don't want a nuanced response because nuanced response isn't amenable to sensationalist headlines. So you say one thing radical, I will say something even more radical. Right? Then it becomes a gatekeeping exercise. We go on first name basis and with influencers and journalists and everything. Like when Raisbai talks about self-respect, right? I haven't spoken to him, so I don't know what his theorizing of self-respect is. But for me, when I think of self-respect as a term, right, in terms of in context of the movement and how we should be conducting ourselves, right? What are the boundaries of this? What is the topography of this self-respect? Sorry to use this very postmodern Savarna kind of vocabulary, but I'll operationalize it. Like, if you notice the dominant social media, at least, okay, dominant social media emotion of anti-caste conversation is anger and is rage. I think this anger is very overrated. Okay, it's a controversial thing to say. I'll say it's very overrated because this anger and this rage has become the marker of the radical. अगर आप गुस्सा नहीं हो, अगर आप angry नहीं हो, if you're not full of rage, then you're not taking it seriously. Seems to be the implication, and I resent that implication. Right? I take it very seriously. I'm very angry, but like we all are, but how that anger manifests is something we have to be very careful about. We live in a Brahminical society where literally any moment we can be torn apart, broken apart. Instruments of state repression, of ideological apparatus, of everything can just fall upon us with it doesn't even need to come on us with the full weight, just needs to lean on us and we'll be gone. Right? Somebody comes and knocks on my door and takes me away, 5 years of my life will be gone in the prison before some judge hopefully throws the case out of the court, right? If anger becomes a defining vocabulary, how many millions of us will have to go to prison? How many of us will have to lose our jobs and livelihoods? And this society, even a racist society like the US, right? Like when you put in a few million, people in the prisons, even they start saying like, okay, now this is too much. This society has an insane capacity for inflicting violence upon us. They are not going to blink twice, right? 10 lakh, 20 lakh, 30 lakh, they don't care. They will invent open air prisons. They'll throw us in the seas. They'll, throw us wherever. They don't care. So this idea of anger and rage, as a marker of radicalness, I am very suspicious about this. Right? This demonstrative anger constantly, this playing out of the rage. And it is also very masculine. It is always manifesting as a dismissive, aggressive, bullying public presence. And any dismissive, aggressive, bullying public presence, no matter what mental gymnastics and Olympics men play with it, is an unsafe space for women. Unsafe space for women, unsafe space for queer sexualities, unsafe space for anybody who has experienced abuse and trauma in their life. Right? Personally, I genuinely feel like this, and anybody who wants to take offense, they can do whatever they want. आपको एंगर है, आपको गुस्सा है, आपको रेज है, मुझे भी है. You are angry, I am also angry. But we owe it to our people to perform that anger in a manner which is non-threatening and non-triggering to our own people. We need more non-masculine, safe spaces, less triggering spaces in that thing. I understand this whole logic that anger, the burden of rage is not on the civility is not on the oppressed and everything. I get that, right? But you also have to look at where things are and what the repercussions are in an institution where Brahminical institutions are completely waiting for one slip like that. So I feel that this idea of self-respect cannot hinge, on how we conduct ourselves, cannot hinge on anger as a central vocabulary. It has to hinge on, the idea of inclusivity, the idea of tolerance, mutual respect, respecting the journey of different people, respecting the plurality of different people's locations, right? I have not had the same journey as you, as the other people, but you have to be gentle. There has to be a gentleness to things. And it is really a very, again, sorry to frame this in that sense, it's a very masculine thing to dismiss gentleness. There's a form of radicalness to gentle, kind of thing, which is tremendously powerful and explosive. And that's, I'm almost bordering on these sort of Gandhian romanticization, which is absolutely not what I'm going for. But this idea that you have to be inclusive, you have to be ideological, like accommodate people, their ideas of different journeys. Because if you don't do it, we come back a full circle. It becomes about who has the right voice, who has the right position. Then you're testing purity, not plurality, right? So this Risebai's message about self-respect, tolerance, and inclusivity, it speaks to me at this level, because I see our role as capacity building, right? The problem of the Dalit intellectual or Bahujan intellectual space is not that there are 500, very opinionated voices of different. Problem is we have only 500, right? We need 50,000. We need 5 lakh voices, right? And that creation of 50,000 or 5 lakh intellectuals, aggressive, assertive voices, like I'm guessing Kanshiram Sahib understood that logic in that sense, and I think that work needs to be a continued process, and we are in that space, and that's our task, right? Despite the state, we have to go into these spaces and broad base this. We have to, I see my task in, to bring Baba Sahib to communities who have never encountered him before. Right? He's already established, like, we have to bring him to, like the challenge, the intellectual challenge of how do you bring Baba Sahib into Pasmanda Muslim communities? How do you bring them into, Vimukta communities, right? In that sense, and it can't be the same model. This is an anthropological challenge, right? What do we academicians know about these communities? Have you done fieldwork there? Every time you go on fieldwork into these spaces, and there's just like it's like my position of reality is just completely warped, right? So that's the anthropological challenge. Like, can we get you know assertive, intellectual, confident voices, even 5, 10 from each of these regions, each of these communities, right? Abhi to, I see that role as the point here. So for me, anything which distracts from that, which comes into conflict with that goal, for me that becomes something that personally I don't want to invest in, right? Like, then that's where I feel that it needs to follow slightly different models. Where I sort of agree, and I will also say disagree with Raisbhai when he says about focus has only been on education, not on other domains. So I agree in the sense that yes, you need to kind of look at the model cannot be you go into a region and a community who has no history of education, right? Nomadic community, or like historically community with low levels of literacy, to go there and immediately say like sell PhD aspirations to people, it doesn't work like that in that instant, right? So I get that education, you need to be sociologically imaginative in terms of how do you work and mobilize that and everything. But entrepreneurship as an empowering solution, this is another thing that I'm slightly wary about investing in, because again, like I was telling you, I grew up around that Kolutola Tapsia Tangla space, right? Which was an industrial hub of Calcutta in the 80s and 90s. Today, all the industries there, at least till 2010, 11, when I was there, are all dying out. Part of the big reason was not because that generation, including my father, not because that generation of entrepreneurs forgot and lost out, because the macro changes that took place there, right? They were all working under the small scale protectionism, where some products, like most notably Hawaii Chappal, rubber, and all of that, was under the small scale industry, protectionism, right? So it was possible for a person with who could just like borrow, secure some little capital from here and there, a few lakh rupees, set up a little karkhana, hire 2 or 3 people, buy one machine, and eke out a living of 15, 20, 25,000 rupees. The coming of big capital when it comes is very interesting in how it changes the dynamic, right? They are not going to enter the Hawaii Chappal business, because then you're competing with 50,000 manufacturers in Tapsia. That you can't compete with that, right? What they will do is they will set up like a new kind of a footwear, like these Crocs and all, right, which are like some kind of polymer. Each machine costs 5 crore rupees. You want to add a bow on that chappal, that will be an additional 2 crore rupees. They will at one point of time create 500 such machines and replace them every 6 months. They will flood the market with lakhs of such chappals, colorful designs and everything. Small scale industry dies, you can't compete with that. That's how big capital works. We've seen that cable industry, you can look at. Calcutta had like so many. Remember that era where they would just put up one dish antenna on the church and each would just supply 200 people? Now we've had 15, 16 years. Do we really needed a set top box and dish TV and Airtel DTH? Did we really need it? We didn't. It was an it was a market which got created despite big capital, and there was governmental regulation to invite big capital in, And the cable operators, unlike the other industries, they put up a big fight. They created unions, they fought legal battles. What happened eventually? They all got wiped out. DTH came, right? And people of my father's generation, I see them, they're all broken men. They all feel like, because their whole idea was, their whole business was a hustle. You do this, you save 20 rupees here, you do this, you put this innovation, vagara, vagara, right? And they measured their self-worth in terms of like how well, despite the challenges, they are, running it. When this comes, their sense of self-worth is gone, because now to compete with that, you need MBAs, you need to go to corporate finance. They don't know that. So for me, this is like a very real anxiety that, if this idea of, and the one part of it that I do agree with Rise by about this is something my father used to always tell me. He used to say, "Why are you studying so much? Despite studying, you'll be working for somebody else. You should always work for your own self." And he really wanted me to do my own business because of this idea that you should not serve somebody else. Some trauma, caste trauma, speaking through him like that, right? And as a young person, I sort of dismissed it. Now that I'm in my 30s, I sort of see the merit in that, because like after you've been jostled around a little bit by your bosses, and you put and labor in systems that you don't control, you start feeling the need that of that wisdom in that sense. So that part I completely agree with Rise by. But the fact that entrepreneurship, as in empowering root by itself, right, in the era of brahminical big capital, मुश्किल है थोड़ा, as a prescriptive category. Anyways, those were my sort of collective thoughts. I don't know how you will make sense of it.